In this sublesson, we're going to discuss file data sources, possible file locations where those files may exist, and then we're going to demo loading the following. We're going to do a couple Excel spreadsheets, and we'll do a text file. But first, for possible file locations. Files locations may be local to your computer. They may be in some network share in your on-premise sources. You may have information sitting in OneDrive for Business. It may be in OneDrive Personal, SharePoint on-premise, or perhaps SharePoint Online. So there's a lot of different places where your files can be located, and there's advantages and disadvantages to each. So some of the individual file data sources we can connect into are the Excel spreadsheet, text/CSV, which are the two we're going to connect into here, XML files, JSON files, PDF files. In a subsequent sublesson, we'll connect into a folder, and then we can also connect into SharePoint folders. So let's go ahead and quickly take a look at the architecture of Power BI so we can see where those files may be located. So as you may recall from a previous lesson, this is the Power BI high-level architecture. And above the dotted line are things that are considered to be in the cloud, and below the dotted line in the middle of the screen are things that are considered to be on-premise. Now, your files may exist up in the cloud, so they could be in OneDrive Personal, OneDrive Business, or SharePoint Online. Or your files may exist on-premise, so they may be local to your machine, or in some network share, or on the on-premise version of SharePoint. So either way in Power BI, we can connect to those different file data types and bring the information into Power BI to be further manipulated and transformed and brought into our data models. So let's go ahead and get ourselves into the Power BI desktop and make a connection into our file-based sources. So in our GitHub files that we've downloaded to our desktop, I'm going to open up the Sales Data Mart sublesson 04 file. So let's go ahead and get that opened up. Okay, so now that the desktop is open, let's go ahead and get ready to bring our additional 3 files into this particular desktop file. So what we're going to do here is go to the Home tab, under the Queries group, click on the Transform Data command, which is going to take us into the Power Query Editor. I just want to point out that we have a number of files already existing in this particular file. Okay, so we're going to go to the files that we obtained from our GitHub repository, and I'm going to open this one up called Sales Data Mart SL0204 Start. So let's go ahead and get that file opened up. Okay, so our desktop file is now opened up, and we can see that we are on a blank canvas here. Just want to point out that on the right-hand side of the screen, we've already got the country population data that we obtained from our website, plus then we preloaded an order date query and a United States sales query, which are in the form of tables here in the data model now. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to go to the Home tab under the Queries group, click on Transform Data like so, and then get ourselves into the Power Query Editor where we're going to make a connection into the next 3 files that we want to bring in as queries. Okay, so the first file that we're going to bring in is one called Products. So far we've got an order date file that has been preloaded. We have our United States sales file, which was preloaded for us, plus the one as mentioned that we did earlier on from our website. What we're going to do here next is click on this new source, choose Excel, and then we're going to go into our data directory here. So we'll go to our MS Press Intro to Power BI, go into the data folder, we'll go into our dimensions folder, and then find this file here called Product. We will then go ahead and click Open. And what's going to happen next is we're going to get brought to our Navigator dialog box. So what we can do here is Power Query Editor is proposing that there's 2 things that we can connect to into that Excel spreadsheet. So if I click on TBL product here, which is option number 1, we can see this what the data looks like. And this is in fact the data that we're going to want. Or we can take a look at this product sheet information. We can see that it kind of looks like the data we want, but there's some extraneous information at the very top of it here. So what we're going to do here is I want to just quickly jump into Excel to show you the difference between these 2 connections that we can make into that Excel spreadsheet, because one is an Excel table that looks like this, and one is the sheet of data called product sheet. So let's go ahead and get that Excel spreadsheet open really quickly here. Okay, so I've opened the actual Excel spreadsheet that we had as our source, and I just want to point out a couple things. So on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, we can see that we've got a sheet called Product Sheet down at the bottom here, and this was one of the things that the navigator picked up on. Also, if I put my cursor inside of this table of data right here, I can see at the very top of the screen, I've got a tab called Table Design. And if I just look a little over to the left-hand side here, I can see the table is called TBL Product. So this is the other thing that Power Query was asking me if I wanted to connect into. The difference between the two here is that we can see if we connected into the sheet of data, if you recall back in the navigator, this information at the very top, which is above the table, was being included in. And we'd have to get rid of that in Power Query if we didn't want that information as part of our data set, which we don't. Alternatively, if we connect in the table, which is this information here, plus a little bit more information that's further down that I haven't highlighted, Power Query will connect into the table of data only. And this is a preferable way to connect into data in an Excel spreadsheet because this is data that somebody has gone through and put a little bit of care and attention into formatting and structuring the data in a certain way that's going to make it a little bit easier to ingest into Power Query Editor. Now, we don't always have this luxury. Oftentimes, we'll have to connect into a sheet of data and do a bunch of cleanup with Power Query Editor as we see fit. And sometimes we just have to take the data that we're provided. But ideally, if you have things in an Excel table, it just makes things a little bit easier on the ingestion side of things, although it's not mandatory. So like I say, I just wanted to point out the contents of this Excel spreadsheet and what the navigator is actually taking a look at. So let's get ourselves back over to the navigator. Okay, so this is where we left off in the Power Query Editor. And once again, we can see the product sheet, which we saw on the Excel spreadsheet, which is including the extraneous information at the top. And TBL product here is only pointing to that table of data. So this is what I want to connect into. So I'm going to connect that little checkbox there and click OK. And now the Power Query Editor is going to go ahead and bring that information in. The last thing I want to do at this particular query is I'm actually going to go over and rename it. We can see that it borrowed the name TBL product from the actual Excel table. I'm going to get rid of that TBL in front of things and call this product. And we like to do this because we like to make our query names descriptive for ourselves if we were to come in and take a look at this, days, weeks, or months later, or if we actually pass this off to somebody else, we want our query names to be descriptive. We're also going to see later on when we get into our data model and into the Power BI service that there are a lot of very good benefits of good naming conventions at the query level, which eventually translates into tables of data, and at the column level. Okay, so these are our individual products that we have in our product catalog. So what we're going to do next here is we are going to bring a text file of data in. So I'm going to click on New Source, go down a little bit lower here, and we're going to see text/CSV. So if I click on that, I can see in my dimensions folder, I've got a file called product level. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that up, and the Power Query Editor is going to open that up, and we can see the contents of that file. So we can see that it's a tab delimited file. The data type detection that it's done so far is based on the first 200 rows. I can play around with that if I want, but I'm going to leave the default. And we can see that there's 3 columns of information here. We got a product subcategory key, a subcategory, and category. The reason that we want to load this file up is that we want a way to aggregate and build hierarchies around our product information. So we'd like to roll individual products into subcategories such as mountain bikes and road bikes, or on the component side, handlebars, bottom brackets. And then at the top level, we want to roll things into product categories such as bikes, components, and clothing. So this is going to enable us later on to build hierarchies. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And the Power Query Editor will go ahead and ingest that file in, and we can see that we've got the 3 columns we saw back in the preview, and everything's been loaded in. And just to walk you through the applied steps here again, just to remind you of all this, is we can click on the source here, and it's going to let us know the source file location. So it's on the C drive where we got our files from GitHub. Next thing that happened is this first row right here, which has our header information, was promoted into the top. And then we'll notice here that this first column is a text data type. We'll discuss data types more in a later sublesson. Is then the Power Query Editor is actually going through and making its best guess on the data types that exist in these columns based on the column profiling of the top 1,000 rows. So these first 3 steps are handled for you automatically by the Power Query Editor, but it is a recommendation to go in and just check these things out and make sure at least the data types were set properly. But once again, we'll talk about that in a later sub-lesson. Okay, so the last file we're going to connect into is a Excel spreadsheet for sales territories. So we can see so far that we're going to be able to analyze our sales data by dates and products. We also want to take a look at doing information analysis by our sales territories. So we're going to do this time is click New Source, go to Excel. We'll find the Excel spreadsheet here called Sales Territory. We'll go ahead and open it up. We'll wait for the Navigator dialog box to open. And we can see here there's only one thing that we can connect into in this Excel spreadsheet, and that's sheet number 1. So we're just going to go ahead and click the checkbox next to it, and we can see a preview of the information that we want to connect into. So I'll go ahead and click OK and wait for the Power Query Editor to finish its work. And now we can see that we have a new query called Sheet 1. And what we want to do here is we're going to rename that to Sales Territories. Okay, so we go ahead and do our rename here. We'll go ahead and hit Enter. And now we're going to see the query name is called Sales Territories. So the last thing that we're going to do here is just a quick couple transformations here. And we can see that the very first row here says Sales Territories, and this should really be our header information. So what we're going to do here is just do a light transform, and we're going to go up to the Transform tab at the very top here. And what we're going to do is go to this command under the Table group and say Use First Row as Header. And what that's going to do is push that sales territory into our header information. So the Power Query Editor was not able to make that determination, but we know that this is the column header for that. So we added in additional applied steps to go ahead and do that. Okay, so those are the file-based sources that we're going to connect to into load. What we're going to do next here is move into a folder of data to bring in the rest of our sales information, and that will provide us all the information we need from the extract point of view for our Power Query Editor. But before we go, what we want to do here is I want to show you the mechanics of what are happening in the actual Power Query Editor. So I'm going to go ahead and save my work. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And we're going to once again get provided with that dialog box I mentioned earlier. What I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to quickly click Apply Later. So instead of saying Apply, I want to say Apply Later here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do next here is I'm actually going to close my Power Query Editor. So I'm just going to go ahead and close it. It's going to ask me if I want to apply my changes. And I'm going to say Not now because I want to explain the mechanics of what's happening here. So if we are now back over on our Power BI desktop, we can see that we have 3 tables of information that have been loaded through to our data model. So we've got country population data, order date, and United States sales. So what has happened here is these 3 tables have gone through the extract process, the transform process, and the load process over to the data model. So let's just recap what that looks like from a diagrammatic perspective. So if you recall back to our Power BI end-to-end process flow diagram, we first made connections into our data sources. So in this sub-lesson, we made connections into 3 different files. We did that extract, the E above the line there. We then moved data into the Power Query Editor, and we did some very light transformations on that data. And if you recall back a moment ago, we had 3 of the queries loaded in as tables into our data model. And the ones we just worked on in this particular sub-lesson here, we actually haven't loaded over into our data model. So far we've only done an E and a T step to those. So what we're going to do here now is I'm just going to get us back into the Power Query Editor and actually go through and perform that load step over to the data model. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm back on my Power BI desktop now. I want to get myself back over into the Power Query Editor because I want to actually bring those other 3 queries through into my data model. So I'm going to click on Transform Data. It takes me back to my Power Query Editor. And at this point in time, the product level, and sales territory, which we just did here in the sub-lesson, I want to load those through to my data model. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Close and Apply button in the upper left-hand corner. And what that is doing here now is it's going to close the Power Query Editor and apply all the query changes that have been made over into the data model. So now what you can see on the right-hand side of the screen under the Fields pane is we actually now have those 3 queries loaded in as tables of information. So I've got product level, and sales territories. So just recapping again on our Power BI end-to-end process flow diagram, we have now taken a series of queries from our data sources we've extracted. We've done some transformations, although we'll start doing more in later sublessons. And now we've loaded everything through to our data model. So we've basically walked through the entire ETL process. All right, so that then brings us to the end of this particular sublesson.